This is probably who I've always been.
Always Been is the new solo album by Craig Finn, frontman for The Hold Steady. Produced by the War on Drugs' Adam Grandusel, the songs that make up Always Been tell the story of a clergyman who lacks faith. So we asked Craig, is this a concept album?
This is probably who I've always been.
I feel like a concept album always has to have some guy who's saving rock and roll, you know?
Right.
But most of these songs deal with the same character and his story, which is a guy who becomes a priest who doesn't believe in God, and uh, things, fall apart for him, and he's, trying to figure it out, and we kind of go into his backstory. Now, throughout the record, there's also kind of songs that I consider kind of what I'd call bottle episodes, which, happen in the world
Right.
of this guy, but aren't necessarily moving that plot along. And I told, I told my manager that it's when I explained it to him that it's sort of like a Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoon, and he
I
didn't
like
think that
that.
sounded very hip. He told me to say it's like Pulp Fiction. So it's one of those two. I
I'm with
think
Rocky all the way, man, and
I,
Bullwinkle.
I think
Jane
Rocky
Boots.
and Bullwinkle are pretty hip too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, and it starts out with a tune called Bethany, which kind of does set things up pretty well.
When we met, I was the reverend. You were in the congregation. Didn't happen right away, but pretty soon. And I never had a calling. It was just a strong desire to be the one that stood up in the room. 'Cause when I was a child, I used to fixate on the chaplain, the way he brought the widows all to tears. And that looked like a decent way to make a little living here. Gave myself to God for a few years.
Yeah, Bethany was the first song. It's I've never had a song that was such a first. Like I wrote it first for the record, and it kind of, brought me this character who was in the downfall after his fall, after, his priesthood came to a wreckage after, due to his lack of faith, etc. But it was also the first song I showed Adam Grandiseel, who produced the record. It was the first song we recorded. And so it kind of, when we got to sequencing the record, it sort of had to be first, you
Yep.
know? So I don't think I've ever had like a song that was so revealed, such an entry.
Yeah.
Um, and it's nice. It's kind of nice to have that. I mean, I feel like from now on, next record I make, I'll be searching for such a clean entry.
Now you mentioned Adam. He produced the record. So how did the two of you work together on this?
Well, I mean, he's brilliant. He's been my friend for a long time, but and I thought maybe it would be a good pair because I know when he makes his own music, he goes on like a journey of sound, where
Right.
he creates, and at some point in the process, he kind of like writes lyrics and gets a song together. But it goes through a lot of changes musically on the way there, and that's how he's explained it to me. I have like a big long story in two chords.
Right.
So I'm kind of the opposite. So I thought like maybe we'd meet in the middle. And it was
Yep.
one of the best ideas I've ever had in my life. It
If you
was
do say so yourself.
yeah, it worked out perfectly. I've been telling people like, you watch Behind the Music or read rock biographies and people say like this was the hardest record we ever made. This is not that. This was such an easy record to make. It was a pleasure. We enjoyed it. I think it was mainly him and me and an engineer a lot of the time, and we
Right.
brought different people in. But it was there were no disagreements. I think he seemed to like the songs I brought in, and then was able to contribute sonically to make them sound great. And so it worked exactly how it should have.
Ah, that's nice to hear. And so sonically, what were there discussions between you and he is what you were after, or did it just come naturally between the two of you?
I mean, it's funny because the one thing I did tell him is that I wanted to be direct,
Uh-huh.
meaning I wanted these songs to connect with people directly. I wanted my words, my lyrics to be understood.
That was a
Uh,
pleasure. That I got to say, I did enjoy that among other aspects that I didn't have to search around for the lyrics online
yeah,
somewhere.
yeah. So I think the way it was mixed, we paid attention to that, and
Yep.
But I think that, some of it was just, I mean, Adam playing guitar sounds like Adam playing guitar. And,
Yeah.
I think, when I've guested on, I've come up and sang with the War on Drugs a few times, and he has this huge pedal board, but also when he plugs directly into an amp, it also just sounds like Adam playing guitar.
Uh-huh.
And he's a really gifted, guitar player. And I think him just creating the music, you know, being in the room, having his own personality into it was a lot of the sonics. And Dave Hartley, who plays bass in the War on Drugs, played bass on everything, and he's a huge part of the sound too. And a lot of those guys played on it, and as well as some other musicians that we brought in from LA.
Right.
And some of it was just what it sounded like when musicians are in the room together, and those are my
Yeah.
favorite records, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Very nice. Very nice. One track I wanted to touch on was Crumbs, which is kind of piano based. Would you consider that one of the narrative tunes or one of the kind of outliers?
Her mother is my sister, she's a fighter, but she's tired now. The third shift's such a bitch to decent sleep. On Sundays she puts perfume on and waltzes with the vacuum on. Sucks up the destruction of the week. In the kitchen there's a radio. She sings along the one she knows. Remembers back when some of these were new. When the girls all chose a guy from the dances at the Y. 'Cause it felt like that was what you're supposed to do.
In the first song, Bethany, he talks about how he sometimes goes to his sisters with her sisters and her daughter on the fringe of Philadelphia, he
Right.
says. And Crumbs puts a microscope on that house. That's in their house. And Crumbs was the only one that we had like a little bit of a false start, or I wouldn't call it that, but we kind of had maybe like a little more of a Velvet Underground feel on that song. And I went out and played it live on some shows I was doing and kind of arranged it a little bit differently. And when I came back, I said, Adam, I think I've got a new idea of how to approach this song. And we kind of put the piano up front. We'd sort of been kind of talking about, I think one of the things we connected on personally was a lot of we made the record in Los Angeles, and there was sort of this feeling of that LA
Yeah.
Warren Zevon, Randy Newman. The album covers a nod to Randy Newman, but the Warren Zevon, piano intro.
Yep.
So I was kind of like, I think Crumbs could do a little bit of that, and I think we got something there.
Yeah, definitely. And another one I want to touch on, Fletcher's, which is definitely narrative because you're
Yeah.
speaking throughout the whole thing. So tell me how that came about.
There weren't any curtains in the front room, and I couldn't sleep once the sun showed up with its heavy August heat. So I sat up on the couch and surveyed the wreckage, still wearing my wristband, which always makes it worse. The bars have been whatever. We shouldn't have even bothered. But after we went back to Fletcher's, the best part of a handle, and a plan to lay out the remainder on the table, listen to some records, and suck up whatever Saturday was left.
That one was like I had this loop and I was just kind of writing a story against it. And I
Uh,
that's definitely one of these bottle episodes where it doesn't really move the narrative forward. But it's about a kid. I was thinking about how as a young person, so many of my friends were convinced that if they could just move, get
right.
out of the city we were living in, which was Minneapolis at the time, where I grew up, that they would, suddenly all their problems would be solved. And I picked Seattle in this story because in the early 90s when I graduated from college, that was a place in the grunge era that a lot of people were trying to get to.
Yep.
And I sort of had this story about this guy who was thinking that all his problems would be solved if he got to Seattle, and then ends up sitting there at the end of the story with a girl on the banks of the river and saying, it's pretty good right here.
And that idea of we got to go somewhere else, it's very Springsteenian, isn't it? It's kind of, we got to get on our folks like us, blah
Yeah.
blah
We
blah.
got to get out of town. Our backs against the wall. We got one last shot to get out of town, right? Ride
Yeah.
into the sunset.
Have you listened to a lot of Springsteen in your formative years?
Quite a bit. Yeah. I mean, that's one of my favorite artists.
Yeah.
And absolutely, like that's a huge influence. But like, because he tells stories about the people he knows, and that's something I've always tried to do myself. Even though I'm from a different place, I mean, I think that those are the stories of, and those are classic stories of youth trying to get out,
Yeah.
thinking that the town's thinking that the town's conspiring against you. And then there's this sort of like, I don't know who said it, but like there's that saying, wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah,
It's
right.
kind of like the,
Yep, yep, yep. Yeah, you can go a long way, but just, I mean, I've done the
and
same thing. I'm here.
a lot of your problems tend to come with you.
They do indeed, that's for sure. Now, I think you're doing some kind of hometown show on the 30th at the Bowery Ballroom. What's that all about?
Yeah, so in New York, Adam, obviously when you make a record with Adam and his band, the War on Drugs, that they're busy with their own
They would
things,
be,
but
yeah.
I have convinced a lot of them to come to New York and play this sort of one night only show with me, along with some of my other friends from here, that some of my musical friends. So it's, Adam and Dave and Robbie from the War on Drugs, Kathleen Edwards, who's a singer-songwriter I love, who sang a lot on the record.
Right.
She's going to be part of it. She's going to open the show and be part of the band. Josh Kaufman from Bonnie Light Horseman,
Ah,
who's produced most of my other records, is going to be part of the band. Joe Russo is an amazing drummer, and it's just a incredible band. I'm really excited for it.
all right, very cool. And you mentioned you're on doing some Hold Steady shows imminently. Is it, how do you balance the two, the solo and the band and all that? Has it been different, a problem over the years, easier these days? How does it
It's
work?
pretty easy, the Hold Steady at this point. We're 22 years in. We do about 30 shows a year.
Yeah,
And we do, at this point, we really do residencies. We don't tour where we just knock out dates. Like when we go to Minneapolis tomorrow, we're going to do 4 shows this weekend, but all in the same
right.
uh, few blocks. We're going to change the venue a tiny bit, but barely. And that's how we tour now. So, I kind of know what our year looks like in advance, and can do the solo thing around it. It actually works really, to me, it works really well. It allows me to flex two different muscles. The Hold Steady is a big, loud rock thing, and my solo shows aren't always. And I'm really grateful that I get to do both.
And the other thing you got going on is a podcast, which I listened to the most recent episode this morning with Jim James,
Oh
and
yeah.
I thought it was
That
pretty
that is
interesting.
a that's I started the podcast for my last record, A Legacy of Rentals, and that record talked a lot about memory
Yep,
and memory and remembering people, and also sort of when we sometimes build stories of our own on faulty memory. So I wanted to kind of keep that conversation going,
right,
partially because as a marketing thing, because records go away quickly these days.
right,
So I thought I'd get like 8 of my friends and we'd have a conversation for 40 minutes each. And what happened is I found I really enjoyed it
yep,
after I did a few of them. And B, people kept calling and saying, "Hey, can I be on it?"
right,
And now it's sort of, now it's like its own thing, and it has a lot of momentum, and I've had, incredible people on it. Um, and it doesn't seem to show any sign of slowing down. I really enjoy it. They're really good conversations, and I think the idea of the intersection of memory and creativity tends to be a pretty fertile thing, because I think a lot of people kind of come to realizations of like how their memory, might affect things while they're speaking to me.
right. Yep, yep, yep. So have you learned anything about the actual function of memory and how it works with people and you know,
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I haven't, like, at one point I thought maybe I'd get involved in like scientists,
yeah, you sure, yeah,
I
yeah,
haven't done that. But what I have found, which my thesis going into the
yeah,
podcast was that writers would say, I have because first thing I ask is, do you have a good memory? And
yeah,
I thought all writers would say yes, and I'm
right.
telling the real story,
Yep, yep, yep,
And it hasn't been that way at all. Almost everyone qualifies it and saying like, I don't remember this. I can remember this.
yep.
A lot of musicians, as you might imagine, can remember all kinds of arcana. about, B-sides of records and,
Oh,
baseball
yes.
players. But I'm someone I do think I have a good memory.
Right.
So I kind of came in confident in my own memory, and now it's been interesting to see just that reaction because I think I have had more no's than yeses. I maybe have to go back, but I think I've probably had more no's than yeses.
I'm interested in age and how it affects, because I'm getting older. I'm almost 70. And
Mhm.
so I can remember things 50 years ago like they happened yesterday, but I can struggle to remember what I did yesterday. So,
Sure, sure. I mean, I know I have uh like a memory, a thing with touring
yeah,
where it's definitely affected my memory because I think that I get transactional, meaning sometimes I get in this mode where I don't think I'm going to see someone tomorrow because
right,
you're meeting people quickly at a
right.
show and you say, well,
Yeah,
we're going
there's
to be in
no point.
Chicago tomorrow, so then all of a sudden that person pops up again and you're like, oh no, I didn't really,
Yeah,
but also I have this when you start moving around a lot, you have this kind of lucid memory where you're I can be like, I remember this happening, but I'm not convinced it did happen.
right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So it's not like I forgot it. I almost think I sometimes remember things that didn't happen.
Right. I worry about that sometimes. I had a great Marianne Faithfull passed away a little while ago, and I had gone to see her at a concert in the early 80s. And I remember her, it was in a tiny little club, and I remember her sitting on the stage and we were at her feet and she drank an entire bottle of Jack Daniels in front of us. So that was my memory. So, and I
Mm.
was wondering maybe I built this up over the years, but
Yeah.
got in touch with a friend of mine in Rochester and he sent me a recording of the concert and you could hear her drinking it all the way through. It was exactly how I remembered it. I was like, yes. So I was kind of relieved.
I've like looked at shows I was at, found shows I was at as a kid, like punk rock shows, and
Yeah.
then looked them up on YouTube. And there's almost always a lot less people there than I
Oh
remember.
yeah, yeah.
I remember them being very grand and full and like, because all my friends were there. I thought everyone in the world was there.
That's it. That makes sense. And I also wonder if when you're young, like I have a 2.5 year old grandson, he seems to
Mhm.
remember everything that happens. So maybe you just get full. He's empty. He's pulling in everything and sticking with them, whereas I'm full. So,
That theory has come up on the podcast a
oh,
lot,
has
and
it?
it also kind of connects to touring, where all of a sudden
Uh,
I've just I've met my quota.
Yeah, yeah, I'm full. Yeah, that's interesting. All right, I have to listen to the whole series now because it sounds fascinating. Uh, yeah. Do you know who you're talking to next on it?
I have a bunch in the can, so
Oh, good.
I can't
No, we
quite
don't
say,
want to
but
give away any
I'm like
secrets.
I'm way ahead. Like that's the thing. Like
Nice.
it's been such a thing. I think there's less, music outlets now, and certainly there's obviously less magazines. So
Yep.
all of a sudden there's like I'm getting calls about people. I'm like, really? They want to come on? But the only thing is like, wow, we might not run this for a few months because we're only
Yeah.
rolling them out once every other week, and
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So you're feeling creative? You're feeling positive about things? I mean, because the world itself is a mess, but it's always a mess in one way or another.
I think, creativity to me is showing up, and I sit down at my desk and I try to make something every day. And that, in that sense, the world, it does affect it, but it's like what I do. So like, when I wake up and I get my coffee, I'm in front of my computer trying to make something. And that usually lasts till about noon.
Right.
So yeah, I feel creative, but I never sort of don't feel creative. I think at this point I've sort of made it my job and I have to do my job.
Okay. Speaking of your job, let's go back to your record for one more track. Postcards, thought was interesting one. Just next to last, 6 minutes long, kind of rocks along. What can you tell me about that?
And the faces at the bus stop, they get swept away like sawdust. The places we won't go will still be there without us. We barely even notice, and it never much gets mentioned in a postcard from a place we've never been.
Well, postcards is, the idea is someone who's getting postcards from someone from their past, and um, and the relationship between them is unclear, but maybe not, maybe not perfect. And I love that one. When we recorded it, that was one where, obviously if you have Adam around, you might want a guitar, a cool guitar part. And that one was like, we ended up putting Shamrock last on the record, but like I was like, okay, this seems like the last song on the record. So like you just keep playing.
Just go for it.
And also we got Sam Fender,
Oh,
songwriter who I love, to sing backup on that one. So that
right.
that one was a really fun one. And it felt like Shamrock is kind of like an encore in some
Yep.
way.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Where Postcards is kind of the ender and the
The
closer, and
set closer. Yeah.
yeah, that goes out on the long jam. So it's always fun to have one. And there was something he did that like reminded me of The Cure in his guitar playing on that one, and that's a band I really love. I'm actually reading the bass player from The Cure's biography right now, and so I'm in a bit of a Cure phase.
Is
So I
that
think
Lowell Tallhorst or whatever his name is?
Wall Tallhorse,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's it.
good book.
Why do I
He's a
know
good
that?
writer.
See, I know that was from 40 years ago. That's why.
He's a good writer, and kind of fun to hear about, their origins. They were maybe into like heavier stuff than I expected them to be into.
Uh-huh.
But I guess, they've also had some pretty heavy guitar records, so I don't know why I'm
Yep.
surprised.
Yep. And some pretty good ones. So yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
can always
great
put up
band.
with them. Can listen to The Cure anytime. Very good. All right. Well, I guess we'll call it a day here. We'll let you get back
Marty,
to getting back to your
yeah,
thing. Yeah.
back to, I guess I'm gonna pack before my trip. So,
There's a good time.
um,
Oh, sorry about that.
no, I mean, look, I tour enough. I know what's going in the suitcase. It's not that hard.
Yeah, I can imagine it must be. You just probably have one ready to go at all times in case. But
Well, thanks so much. I hope
my
we'll get over
pleasure.
to,
Yeah,
if I
hopefully
can
you
go over
make
to
it
New
down here
Zealand at some
eventually.
time.
It would be
I'd love
wise, I think.
that.
You can do
Yeah, well, take
hang
care
out
and
with the
thanks for
rest of the
having me.
Finns. We got plenty of them.
Yeah, I'd like to. I met someone's son.
It might be
Uh,
Tim Finn's son. He's I think just moved to New York and is doing his thing.
that's that's the one. Is that Liam?
No, Liam is Neil's son, Liam Finn. He does his own thing as well and is part of Crowded House these days. But Liam's very cool. So you could have met Liam. Yeah.
No, I can't remember.
There's a bunch of there's Elroy and Liam. There's all sorts of
I'll figure it out. It was in New York when I met him, so.
very good.
But
All
I'd like
right.
to at least come be around, be nearby.
If you enjoyed this episode of the 13th Floor's Music Talk series, please be sure to subscribe to the website or to the YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram and wherever you find your podcasts. There's a whole lot more to discover.